Hey everyone, this is Valentina Flores, CEO of Red Sentry, and this is the Ctrl-Alt-Secure podcast. And really excited for our guest today because we're going to be talking a lot about cyber insurance, which I know is one of the most common questions that I get asked. And there's so much unknown around this topic, and I think people are sometimes scared off of it a little bit. So I'm really excited to have subject matter expert here today to kind of just talk through everything about cyber insurance, what you need to know, things people miss in it, why it's so important. So today we have Chris Bollig of Bellrock Insurance. So Chris, if you want to just kind of start off and tell us a little bit about your background, your current role, what Bellrock does, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I'm Chris Bollig with Bellrock Insurance. So I founded Bellrock Insurance after spending a little under 15 years with the insurance, like large insurance carriers. So I know quite a bit about how products work, how pricing works, some of the claims and coverage issues that come up from time to time. Prior to that, I was a civil engineer and worked in construction. So, changed careers midway through, but I'm happy to have my own business, physically located in Connecticut and primarily serving small and medium-sized businesses in the southern New England area.
Cool. So, and I didn't know that about your previous career, so that's interesting. So kind of just start us off with just as if we're 5 years old, like what cyber insurance is and
Right.
kind of how it's become part of risk management in today's world.
Yeah, it's a really challenging question to answer. I guess that, as I was trying to explain to a 5-year-old, I think even, I have young kids and they seem to sort of understand naturally the risks of sort of being online and things that you can see. So as everything's become more connected digitally and businesses are sending electronic invoices, sending a lot of email, just doing a lot of business electronically instead of in person, that comes with a ton of efficiencies, but also with a lot of risks. So there's always people who are trying to take advantage of situations, and you don't have to look very far in the news to find all sorts of examples across all sorts of industries of ransomware attacks or data breaches or things where companies' systems just weren't locked down to the extent that they thought. And they end up in a situation where they have some liability if customers' information gets breached. There's like notification for customers, but also their systems may be locked down and they can't do business. So what do they do? If they can't bring in revenue, they can't access their systems. And the problem has developed that cyber insurance has come to solve is that the traditional insurance policies exclude electronic data. So there's this sort of gap in the insurance product space that cyber insurance, which is relatively young,
Mhm.
came in to solve.
Yeah, I mean it's so young, but it's expanding so fast. I feel like ago we weren't talking about cyber insurance. Like a few companies, maybe in the cybersecurity space, like
Right.
they had it, but it wasn't this huge thing. And now more and more industries are getting it. And so I think that's why there's just so many questions around it. And I mean, even basic insurance, most people don't understand what policies they have. So then you add
That's
on
fair. Yeah.
digital.
Right.
So I
Right.
guess for like a cyber insurance policy, like what are some of the key components like in that policy? Like what do businesses need to look for when they're getting that coverage?
Yeah, at the very highest level, it works in much the same way that any other sorts of insurance policy works. So you have what's called first party, which is coverage for yourself and your business.
Mhm.
So think about, again, you have that sort of ransomware attack that happens and you can't get into your system, so you need somebody to help you. You need legal to come in and help you. You need somebody to actually do the forensics and figure out how deep the breach was. There's just costs that are sort of borne by your company, so that's called first party. So that's one coverage part. And then another one is all the things related to what's called third party, so liability. So that's like on your car insurance. If you hit somebody else and cause damage, you need your insurance to help make them whole. It's the same
Mhm.
thing with third party cyber liability. If you're a consultant and you're working for a company and something that you do causes a breach in their systems, then you need cyber liability, for example. So there's lots of different coverages that fall underneath those two, but those are the big two. And then I would add
Does
one more. Oh, go ahead.
okay. I was gonna say, does the third party include vendors and supply chain? Because I know that's a big, huge question
Yeah,
mark in
that was actually
cybersecurity.
the The third
Oh,
one that I was just going to
there you go.
mention is one that's often overlooked and often excluded in a lot of the endorsed on cyber coverages is business interruption or third party. So I think a good recent example of this, from what I understand, is there were a lot of auto dealers that were affected by a cyber event where it was actually a third party system that they were using to sell
Mhm.
cars, and that system went down. And so you go into a car dealership and all these people are coming in and they can't do anything, they can't sell them any cars, so they lost revenue for a period of time. It wasn't that their system was down, it was that there was this third party system down. So having that dependent business coverage is also something to consider depending on the type of business that you are.
I know every insurance company is different and all the policies are different, but in general, does the base level package, like the minimum that someone can purchase to have cyber insurance, include those things like third party and ransomware, or is there an option to just get that, like check that one little box, kind of like the car insurance, like I only want this bare minimum? How does that work?
I wish it were that easy, but no, it's not. And because cyber insurance is relatively new, it really can be a 30 flavors type
Yeah,
thing where you really need the help of an agent to evaluate the different coverages. It's honestly hard enough for insurance agents to keep it straight because you've got
yeah,
a dozen different companies who are having this different stuff, and we've got tools to break down, what's the important coverage for the business, and can lay that out really nicely for the company to be able to understand what they need and what's included, what's not included.
yeah. I remember when we got ours, we had to fill out this huge questionnaire, and then it was like meetings back and forth, just trying to understand our business.
Hmm.
And then like the policy came after. So, and it was a pretty
Yeah.
extensive questionnaire.
Yeah,
Yeah, that makes
that's the most common response that I get from everybody when I mention cyber insurance. It's usually sigh, roll eyes back. Oh, those applications are just ridiculous and such a pain.
but I mean, cyber insurance, like everything else in this space, really is just like, you know, people roll their eyes, or it's like trying to check the box, and it's like the necessary evil. But it's like these things are there for a reason, and it's
Right.
important. And ransomware is at an all-time high. And like, if you don't have cyber insurance and you're in this industry, it's not if, it's
Hmm.
when, and you're going to feel it on the back end. And a lot of clients nowadays won't even do business if you don't have certain levels of cyber insurance. So,
That's
that's a
right. Yeah, I mean that comes up a lot, and that is often a reason why people will come to me. I mean, I just am working on one now that for years and years had a contract with a client. They do some consulting work. All of a sudden, they have a data breach. Luckily, it wasn't substantial or extensive. I mean, it was painful enough, but that caused the client to reevaluate the service agreement, and they decided to input pretty high cyber liability limits going forward. It puts people into a pinch. If they don't already have it, if they're not already thinking about it, now you have a data breach. So it's a lot more difficult to get that coverage.
And without getting too technical, like if you have a solid package, you have a solid plan, you're pretty
Mhm.
covered. Are there any pieces of the cyber attack that aren't covered that people kind of miss? Like I know we talked about the ransomware, so like the
Yeah,
ransomware payment is something we get asked out about a lot, like the downtime coverage. Is there
right.
anything that's like isn't covered that people often falsely assume is covered?
Yeah, the a couple of things that I typically look for immediately are the ransomware coverage. So it for a period of time, ransomware was just included in most policies at the limit. So if you have $1 million cyber liability policy, ransomware would just be excluded. So what's happened now is a lot of companies are excluding it. A lot of companies are putting in a sub limit. So you might have 50,000 or 100,000 or 250,000 in a sub limit for ransomware. Another really important one to look at is, do you if you do have a ransomware attack, there's two different ways that that can happen. You can be reimbursed. So if and different policies treat it in different way, either reimbursement or pay on behalf. So let's say you have a ransomware attack and somebody's demanding $50,000 in Bitcoin. Like, you have to make a decision. Am I going to pay that out of pocket? Do I have the cash, or do I have support from somebody else to pay that out of pocket and being reimbursed from my insurance company, which is going to be a little bit cheaper? Or do I want the insurance company to step in and handle everything and pay on behalf? So those are just a couple examples, but there's 5 or 6 different coverages which are sublimited now that's definitely a way to differentiate and find the right coverage.
And I guess like when we were talking about that survey, say a company is filling that out and they say, you know, we get annual pen tests, we do all this vulnerability scanning. They're saying that they do all this, and then they get attacked. You're looking at the plan and you find out that they don't actually have those boxes checked.
Yeah.
Assume that completely negates the coverage.
Well, with insurance with the law, it's always it depends. That it is really going to depend on the situations. What I always tell people is in the application, it's really important to answer positively to as many of the security questions as you can, but truthfully. Like if you don't have it, don't say that you do because you could risk not having that covered. Like by analogy, if you own a home and you don't have a front door or you leave your garage doors open, the more things you do, like if you have a fence around your property and a
Right.
security guard, you're going to get better rates. So it's really just the different types of controls that the insurance companies are looking for. I think people should really be excited to put those things in because it's just going to lower the chance of you having a really, really expensive 60% of companies that have a breach, don't survive after 6 months. So it's really
Right.
the
And
yeah.
if you do those things on the front end, you might not need to go through the insurance process
Right.
afterward. I mean, they're there
Yeah.
for a reason. One question we get a lot is, what we do specifically, like the penetration testing.
Hmm.
There's some insurance companies where getting that done lowers the premium, sometimes to an
Hmm.
extent where it can even pay for the pen test itself and you're
Yeah.
kind of breaking even, but you have all this extra security. And then I've heard that some insurance companies now are requiring pen testing or vulnerability scanning something before they'll even do a policy at all. So is that
Hmm.
just that's dependent on the insurance company and how they want to go about it?
Yeah, I would say it depends on both the insurance company and the business, the
That makes
type
sense.
of business that is applying. If you're a smaller business, then that might be overkill. But if you're a high
Yeah.
risk business has a lot of PII, has HIPAA, then definitely that's going to be worth a pretty big discount because you're probably paying quite a bit for your cyber insurance.
Right. So the cybersecurity posture in general is just going to be looked at on a custom basis for that
Hmm.
company, that business, that risk, what they have in place, what they don't have in place, and then that
Yeah.
premium is going to be decided from there.
Yeah, there's definitely baseline things that most insurance carriers are going to expect every company to have, like multi-factor authentication. That's the front door of your house. Like that's become
Yeah.
just table stakes. If you don't have that, you're going to have a very hard time getting coverage no matter what type of business you are. And there's a handful of more things that are just, again, sort of everybody needs this. It's been proven statistically to
Yeah.
prevent losses.
If a company has had a previous breach in the past, does that make them harder to insure, or is it just part of the conversation? I mean, sometimes a company
Yeah.
that's been breached is the most secure now because they actually take this stuff seriously. So, how do you look at
Right.
companies that have been a victim before?
It depends. Just put yourself in the chair of an underwriter who's making the decision to write a company or not. What you're going to want to know are the details of the breach, and
Mhm.
then your next question is going to be what did you do to prevent it from happening again? If a company really woke up to the risk, and they had some coverage, but they maybe were sort of mediocre in how they approached it, and then things really turned around and they got really serious about their controls and their investments, then I would agree with you that that would probably be a pretty good company to take on. But if
Yeah.
they just thought, oh well, this happens to everybody and it wasn't that big of a deal, then it probably would be hard.
Okay. Are there certain industries right now that are getting this? I mean, obviously, companies in tech and cybersecurity are
Hmm.
generally getting this, but
Yeah.
even some of them don't have it. Are there certain industries that like 100% of them are getting it, that are like moving into it more, that need to be focusing on it more than they are? I know you said SMBs are kind of
Yeah.
where you focus, and small businesses probably, in the past weren't getting this at all, but now they're moving into the realm.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the statistics from, say, some of the government agencies that monitor cybercrime, small businesses are actually targeted pretty heavily
Right.
as a percentage. So I would say that no one's immune. Even if you say you don't have data, customer data, you still have employee data. So again, going back to that first party thing, you still have some exposure. Like you might not need a multi-million dollar limit policy, but it's definitely a risk that you want to protect. A couple of trends I've been seeing this year, a lot of state government agencies are requiring pretty high limits for their vendors or
Okay.
contractors, especially if they're dealing in any sort of state data that have resident or employee data. And even with really small businesses, they're being asked to get pretty high limits. So I would say anyone who's going to work for a government agency is already experiencing some pretty strict requirements. Then there's the typical professional services like lawyers, accountants, MSPs. They are already feeling the pain and they're feeling the pain even more.
I mean, they're touching so many other businesses. I mean,
Mhm.
the liability is
Yeah,
in an MSP, especially,
yeah,
because they're touching. But even, I mean, lawyers are touching. Everyone's touching sensitive data, but
right.
MSPs have so much control over the technology specifically that
Yeah,
it's a huge liability there. So yeah,
right.
I'm not
And
surprised they're focusing more.
I work with a lot of manufacturers and contractors, which are very high targets of cyber criminals. And a lot of time, it's not just the invoice manipulation, the business email
Right.
compromise that they're trying to get at. But with some manufacturers, it's they want to shut the place down. They want to get in. If everything's sort of interconnected and there's some sort of access point, they can shut the floor down, which can be
Yeah.
very expensive.
The invoices is a huge part I mean, every industry is a victim of that right now. And I think people don't realize that. And
Yeah,
there's just this obviously common myth of, well, you know, we're not a technology company, so we won't be hacked, or we're too
yeah,
small, so we won't be hacked. We're a startup, we're this, we're that, and it's just it's not true. Like it can't be
yeah.
part. And like you said, it's kind of the opposite of the truth. Now those companies are getting targeted even more than
Even more.
enterprises because
Right.
hackers know they don't have 200 security engineers sitting around protecting it all day. So why
Yeah.
don't I just go after this, this
Right.
guy in HR who's going to sign off on any invoice I send him, and it's just a much easier attack. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad those companies are starting to prioritize it, whether, it's because someone told them to or not.
No, it makes total sense from a criminal mind standpoint to just go for a bunch of little small ones. That's probably not going to capture a lot of attention and you can just get away with it all day.
I tell people it's like, if you think about being like a pickpocket or a thief,
Hmm.
am I going to try to break into the Bank of America vault? Or am
Yeah.
I going to try to just grab a wallet of someone walking down the side of the street? It might not be as big of a payout, but it's much easier. And I can go pick 30 wallets in 10 minutes versus
Yeah.
spending years planning for this big bank heist. And it's the
Yeah.
same kind of thing. So I think we're
Yeah.
going to see more and more, especially once you introduce AI on the hacking side. And now they can, not even AI, but just like automation and streamlining the hacking process in general.
Hmm.
They're able to get to so many more businesses faster and automated. So yeah, I think it's going to continue in that direction.
Yeah. I definitely agree.
So I guess, for the next it is still like so young and everything's changing really fast in cyber
Mhm.
insurance. Over the next like 5, 10 years, are there any things that you think are coming down the pipeline, or like what's the future of cyber insurance? Is it going to be just as ubiquitous as, car insurance? Like how is
Yeah.
that going to progress, you think?
Yeah. Another great question. 5, 10 years, who knows? I definitely would expect, rates to keep going up. I mean, that's true of all insurance is just, that's the most common thing that people think of when they think insurance is prices are just always going up. I think the trend's just going to continue of what I'm seeing now, at least for the next couple of years, of people needing higher limits and
Mhm.
insurance companies still struggling with the capacity to offer that because the average globally of a cyber event, the average cost was somewhere over $4 million. That's the average, not the median. There's some really huge ones out there. So there's a lot
But
of good
even
data,
still,
but
that
that's a really
number,
big number.
every time I see that number, it barely processes in my brain. I know it's true, but
Yeah,
it's crazy that that's the average, which means many are far above that as
right,
well.
right. Which hopefully, everybody can appreciate that that makes it really hard to price that policy and that risk. And so you'll see a lot of investment into data, a lot of investment into the products to make them more sophisticated, more accurately priced, which means those applications are going to get better and better at actually narrowing in. One of the challenges is that, it's technology, and technology changes so rapidly that it's
Yeah.
really hard to keep up. It's really hard for the products and the underwriting to keep up with the risk.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain advancements like, I mean, obviously AI is the one everyone's talking about right now, but if a hacker's using AI to get into someone, or if they're getting in a traditional, you know,
Mhm.
brute forcing a password, I that wouldn't necessarily matter to you guys, or would it?
The means that I mean, what would matter is are the hackers using different means to get access than the routes that not just
Yeah,
insurance companies, but cyber security professionals already understand. Like, is there some sort of new risk
right.
or route to get into a company's data
Yeah.
that's
You
being
need to
uncovered?
know what the different doors are so you can
Yeah.
assess if it's closed or not to
Yeah, I
price
think
it
the
out.
house is like the greatest example because it makes it really simple. It's like you've got doors, you've got
Right.
windows, you've got driveways, all sorts of things like how you can secure it and thinking about it
Yeah.
in that way.
As new
So,
doors open, insurance will have to make sure they're closed in order to figure out these policies. I actually
right.
had never thought about before how variable the price of these attacks are and how that affects insurance. I never thought about how wide that spectrum is of dollar amount on the attack. So that's a really interesting point
Yeah,
that that's part of why it's so hard to price it out.
right. And that's why you see, what we were talking about earlier, some of the sub limits. So that's a way for the insurance companies to sort of, okay, well, we can't predict a multi-million dollar ransomware attack, so we're going to put some sort of sub limit, which then the business just needs to understand what's the risk of that happening and
Right.
how much cash am I going to need if it does.
If there's companies out here listening right now and they're not really sure where to start, they're kind of overwhelmed by the process, where would you recommend they kind of start out and looking like, am I a good candidate for it? Do I need it? What should they start by doing?
Yeah, I would say the best thing to do is talk to your agent. If you're working with an insurance agent already, a good insurance agent is going to be able to explain the risk to you, kind of talk through the different companies. Search cyber insurance. You can always, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to anyone about any questions that they have. I'm sure you'll be sharing the contact information in
Yeah,
the show in some way. But yeah, that's it. If you're out there somewhere and you have an agent, talk to your agent. Really be happy to answer your questions as well.
yeah, just ask the questions, kind of
Yeah,
start the conversation. It doesn't mean you
that's
have
right.
to sign up for a multi-million dollar policy tomorrow, but at least you kind of
Yeah.
know where you're positioned. And it's the same thing on cybersecurity. Like, you just kind of need to know what your current status is so then you can decide what those next action items are for your company.
You want to get a baseline of what are the risks and what can I do.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I appreciate it. That even cleared up a lot for me. I learned a lot in
Good.
this, so I'm sure the people listening did as well. Um, any final thoughts or anything else for the
No,
audience?
thank you so much. It's a really important topic, and like you said, 90% of the people kind of think it'll never happen to them, which we both know isn't true. So I'm always happy to get on these sorts of venues and try to educate people who might listen on at least considering getting some protection because it's still a pretty affordable thing. Despite all the conversations that we just had today, the prices are for most people still pretty reasonable.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for being here and just talking us through it. And thank you, everyone, for listening.